What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be comparing the new Samsung Galaxy A12 to last year's A11. I'm going to talk about what's new and what's changed with this new A12. I'll also offer my opinion on whether or not it's worth the upgrade, and hopefully by the end, this will help you decide if you are considering maybe either one of these devices as your next smartphone. There's a lot to go over here, so I won't waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and get right into it and see what these phones are all about. So first things first, let's actually talk about pricing and availability. This new A12 right now retails for between $200 and $250 depending on where in the world you're located. And with this device maybe coming to some prepaid carriers in the future, it could be even cheaper than that soon. Last year's A11 launched at a similar price, right around $200, but now, a year later, you can snag one of these phones for $170 or less, which is pretty nice. Either way you look at it, these are similarly priced devices, and while they aren't the cheapest level of A-series phones in the lineup, they certainly fall in that budget-friendly space. And if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can get both of these phones at their cheapest current prices. So check down there for all the deals and discounts. Physically, I think it's pretty obvious that not a whole lot has changed from the A11 to the new A12. They both look very much like budget Samsung devices still, but there are some interesting changes worth mentioning. First off, size-wise, the new A12 is now a little bigger. It's a 6.5-inch device, while the A11 is a 6.4-inch phone. The size difference isn't drastic though. The new phone is just a tiny bit taller, but actually a little slimmer on the sides, interestingly enough. And while the screen size changed just a little, the thing that changed a lot is actually how chunky the new A12 is. This phone is quite a bit thicker and noticeably heavier than the A11, mainly due to the much bigger battery crammed inside, which I'll talk about in a second. Besides all of that, up front you can see that for whatever reason, Samsung decided to go back to the teardrop notch for the front camera on the new A12 instead of the hole punch cutout like on the A11. And I gotta be honest, I don't really like this change. It sort of feels like a step backwards, since the corner camera cutout looks to me to be like a more premium and maybe more modern of a design. Across the bottom, both phones also have a little bit of a chin, but really you get a pretty solid screen to body ratio all around. Certainly better than some other devices in this price range. Around back, I think it's pretty easy to tell that both of these phones are made from plastic, but Samsung really changed up the design and finish on this new A12. Rather than a shiny, smooth, glossy plastic like we've seen on so many A-series phones over the years, this new A12 has this lined, textured finish across the top 75% of the rear housing, and then a smooth bottom portion by the logo. There's no shine, no color shifting. It's super simple, but I think it still looks nice. And the fit and finish here is really just going to be a matter of personal preference. The new A12 is a little grippier, but it's all the same plastic anyway, and neither phone has any of those extra physical features like wireless charging or water resistance rating, so nothing has changed there either. Taking a look around at everything else, on the left side, both phones have the SIM and SD card tray. Up top is where the A11's headphone jack was, while on the A12 it's now moved to the bottom. You'll also find the USB-C charging port and single speaker setup down there on both phones as well. On the right side, there's the same volume switch, but differing power buttons. The A12's now doubles as a fingerprint sensor, while the A11's fingerprint sensor is of course on the back. You can see we also have quite the change in camera setups as well, which I'll go more in depth with shortly. But jumping back to the fingerprint sensor here, the new placement and setup on the A12 I think is a great move. The power button sensor combination is the perfect setup. It's responsive, it's easy, and I'm honestly just glad to have it in general. Unlocking seems to be about the same speed on both phones with this method at least, but with face unlock, I think the new A12 has a little bit of an edge here. More often than not, it gets to the home screen a split second faster. So that looks like an improvement to me. Like I mentioned a second ago, the A12 is a much thicker and heavier device, and that's because this new phone now packs a 5,000 milliamp battery inside. The 4,000 milliamp battery on the A11 in my own experience was always really solid. I could get more than a day's use out of the phone no problem, but now with 20% more juice, I think this A12 borders on being a true powerhouse device. A day and a half or more of use without ever touching the charger. Now, yes, there are some devices out there with still bigger batteries than this, but I do think the bump up in capacity on this new A12 is actually actually one of the more significant upgrades to this new phone. Of course, the battery isn't the only thing that changed. Inside, the new A12 is now powered by the MediaTek Helio P35 processor, and it starts at 3 gigabytes of RAM. You can also get an A12 with 4 or even 6 gigs of RAM now too, and up to 128 gigs of built-in storage. The A11, on the other hand, has the Snapdragon 450 processor, but just either 2 or 3 gigs of RAM, and a max 64 gigs of internal storage. Now, to me, these spec upgrades are really significant, especially the RAM boost. The Geekbench scores alone here reveal a lot of information already. The multi-core score on the new A12 is twice as high in comparison, and in a real-world test, you can also see that 4 gigs of RAM on my A12 really produces a difference versus the measly 2 gigs on the A11. In my time using the A11 last year, I always thought the phone was good enough for casual use, even with its less powerful specs. But now, with all that potential in the A12, I think this new device is a really solid, bang for your buck sort of smartphone. Speed-wise, you can see that more often than not, there is a noticeable and sometimes even significant speed difference in launch and load times with even stock Android apps. Now, part of that reason could be the fact that this new A12 does ship with One UI 2.5 installed. My A11 has yet to get that update right now, which is a bummer, and it may be a contributing factor in performance. But the real big change is with app management. 2 gigs of RAM on the A11 just really isn't much nowadays, and maxing out at 3 gigs didn't offer that much more. 4 gigs as the base configuration on the A12 now is already way better. Apps stay loaded longer and launch faster, but being able to configure this phone up to 6 gigs means that the A12 has the potential to be a great budget-friendly gaming phone even. All in all, I think the internal spec upgrades on the A12 are really fantastic. It's a huge boost for this phone for sure, and while maybe not a whole lot of other stuff has changed on this device, if performance is your thing, I think it's worth jumping up to the A12 now for that reason alone. In regards to the display, while the A12 did get a little larger, like I mentioned, it's still the same technology as before. So both phones offer a PLS IPS display at 720 resolution. The A11 comes in at 1560 by 720, 268 pixels per inch, while the larger A12 has a 1600 by 720 resolution at 264 pixels per inch. Side by side, while I know the screens are technically different since the selfie camera setup has changed, I can't really see an actual difference in the viewing experience. The A12 is maybe a little more colorful in some instances, maybe more saturated, but that I think is about the only thing I could pick out. Black levels to me look the same. They both peak at about the same brightness, and they are kind of a lower resolution than I think some people would like at this screen size, but you're still getting a huge display for consuming content, which is obviously great, and at this price point, I'm not really sure you can expect too much more. All in all, if you're coming from the A11, expect about the same viewing experience jumping to the A12. There's just no real significant changes here, unfortunately. Finally, let's talk cameras. And this is where actually a whole lot has changed. First off, in regards to the specs, last year's A11 had a triple lens setup, a 13 megapixel main lens, a 5 megapixel ultrawide, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. This new A12 gets a huge upgrade to the main lens first off, now a 48 megapixel shooter, a slightly wider 5 megapixel ultrawide lens, seemingly the same 2 megapixel depth sensor, but Samsung also threw on their macro lens here as well to complete the quad lens setup. With the shooting modes and capabilities, obviously the A12 now allows for super close-up pictures with a macro lens and a 48 megapixel high detailed shooting mode with the new main lens. But most everything else is actually going to be the same. There's no 4K, no slow-mo, no night modes, not a whole lot there as far as add-ons or features with either device really. And in practice, the pictures that these phones produce are surprisingly different as well. The new A12 offers a shot with the rear lens that's significantly more detailed, which is great, and you should expect that with the new lens, but it's also much more saturated, while the A11 produces a duller but perhaps more realistic looking image. On the flip side, with the selfie cameras, which are slightly different lenses here too. The results sort of flip. The A12, again, is much more detailed, but is now a darker, more saturated shot in comparison. I think both these phones produce a great result in their own right, especially considering the price point. It may just be what sort of look you prefer with your images, but it's sort of interesting how each phone ends up with a completely different result. I think the A12 is the more capable device overall with these upgrades, but I know the differences in results here are going to produce some differing opinions. All in all, this new A12 is the slightly larger, much beefier device with a big battery, big boost in specs, decent camera upgrade, all for under $250. And this list of improvements and upgrades I think makes this phone absolutely worth the upgrade over last year's A11. If you have last year's phone, jumping to the A12 is going to get you just a much better device in a number of different ways. And I think it's actually one of the few new devices that's really and truly better than its predecessor in a number of measurable and objective ways. A lot of phones nowadays have minimal upgrades, if at all. Sometimes features and specs even get taken away, but that's just not the case here. The A12 is absolutely worth considering, and I applaud Samsung for all the changes they brought to this new phone. So there you go. That's everything you need to know about the new A12 compared to last year's A11. What do you guys think? Is the A12 something you're considering about upgrading to? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.